Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that's going to make you grateful for literally everything in your modern life. And I mean everything. We're talking about why you wouldn't last a single day in Aztec times before you get too comfortable in that chair, scrolling through your phone with your air conditioning humming and your filtered water within arm's reach. Hit that like button if you enjoy these kinds of deep historical dives. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always good to know you're out there and that the work we put into these videos is being seen. Now, here's what I want you to do. Dim the lights, maybe grab a snack, preferably something that didn't require you to sacrifice a human being to obtain, and let's jump into one of the most brutal, fascinating, and absolutely unforgiving civilizations in human history. Because here's the thing, when most people think about the Aztecs, they picture feathered headdresses, golden temples, and maybe some vague notion of human sacrifice. But what they don't realize is that every single aspect of Aztec life was designed to break you, test you, and quite literally kill you if you weren't perfect. You think your Monday morning is rough? Try waking up in Tenochtitlan in 1500 AD, where your very existence depends on appeasing gods who demand blood, where a single wrong move in the market could get you enslaved, and where the most common cause of death wasn't disease or old age, it was being ritually murdered by your own neighbors. So buckle up. We're about to spend a day in the Aztec Empire, and I can guarantee you that by the end of this video, you'll never complain about traffic jams or Wi-Fi passwords ever again. You wake up, but not to the gentle buzz of your smartphone alarm. No, you wake up to the sound of drums. Deep, thunderous drums that seem to shake the very ground beneath you. The air is thick, humid, and filled with smoke from countless cooking fires, mixed with something else, something metallic and sweet, that you can't quite identify yet. Spoiler alert, it's blood. You're lying on a woven mat that's about as comfortable as concrete, in a small room with walls made of adobe and stone. There are no windows as you know them, just small openings that barely let in light. The door is a hanging piece of cloth that offers about as much privacy as a napkin. Your back aches, your neck is stiff, and you realize very quickly that you have absolutely no idea where you are, what year it is, or why everyone around you seems to be speaking a language that sounds like it was designed by someone gargling obsidian. That language, by the way, is Nahuatl, and if you don't speak it fluently, which let's be honest, you don't, you're already at a massive disadvantage. Imagine trying to navigate New York City, but everyone speaks a language you've never heard. The signs are in pictographs, and making the wrong gesture could literally get you killed. You stumble to your feet, and the first thing you notice is that you're wearing something that can barely be called clothing. If you're a man, you've got a loincloth and maybe a simple cape if you're lucky. If you're a woman, you're wearing a hoopeel, basically a sack with holes for your head and arms. No underwear, no shoes, no nothing. And before you even have time to process the full horror of your fashion situation, you hear footsteps approaching. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that suggest someone is coming to collect you for something. And in Aztec times, being collected rarely ended well for anyone involved. Guys, I want you to take a moment here and think about this. You haven't even been awake for 5 minutes, and you're already facing language barriers, clothing that wouldn't pass dress code at a nudist colony, and the ominous sound of approaching strangers. This is just the beginning. Drop a comment if you think you could handle waking up like this, and be honest, because what comes next is going to make this morning routine look like a spa day. The person who enters your room, and by room I mean slightly enclosed area with walls, is a man you'll come to know as the Kalpuli leader. Think of him as your neighborhood association president, except instead of complaining about your lawn, he has the power to decide whether you live or die based on how well you contribute to society. He's speaking rapidly in Nahuatl, gesturing at you with increasing agitation. You, of course, have no idea what he's saying, but from his expression and body language, it's probably something like, "Get up, you lazy piece of human garbage, and prove that you deserve to consume oxygen for another day." The cal pulley system was the foundation of Aztec society, and it was brutal in its efficiency. Imagine if your entire life was controlled by your homeowners association, except they could kill you for breaking the rules. And the rules were written in a language you didn't understand, by people who believed that the sun would literally stop rising if they didn't murder enough people each year. You try to communicate through gestures, pointing to yourself and making what you hope are friendly facial expressions. This is a mistake. The cal pulley leader's face darkens, and he says something sharp and angry. What you've just done, without realizing it, is demonstrate that you're either foreign, mentally deficient, or possessed by evil spirits. None of these options are particularly good for your life expectancy. Here's what you need to understand about Aztec society. It was obsessed with order, hierarchy, and conformity. Everyone had a role, everyone knew their place, and stepping out of line wasn't just socially awkward, it was literally dangerous. The Aztecs believed that chaos and disorder would anger the gods, and angry gods meant the end of the world. So when you, a confused modern person with no understanding of proper social protocols, start acting weird in front of a community leader, you're not just being rude, you're being cosmically threatening. The leader motions for you to follow him, and you really don't have a choice. As you step outside into the morning air, you're hit with a sensory assault that would make a sewage treatment plant seem pleasant. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Imagine taking every unpleasant odor you've ever encountered: rotting garbage, unwashed bodies, animal waste, cooking grease, and something that smells suspiciously like death, and mixing them together into a concentrated essence of "why did I ever complain about my commute?" But then you look around, and despite the assault on your olfactory system, you have to admit that Tenochtitlan is absolutely stunning. You're standing in the middle of what might be the most impressive city in the world circa 1500 AD, built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, connected to the mainland by massive causeways that stretch for miles. Tenochtitlan was home to somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people. To put that in perspective, London at the same time had maybe 50,000 residents, and Paris was pushing 100,000 on a good day. The city is laid out in a perfect grid, with canals running between the streets like some kind of ancient Venice. Except, instead of romantic gondoliers, you've got men paddling canoes filled with everything from corn to severed heads. The architecture is incredible. Massive stone pyramids rising into the sky, temples covered in intricate carvings, and buildings that would make a modern engineer weep with envy. But here's the thing about impressive architecture in the ancient world. It was usually built by people who were worked to death, and it was designed to house activities that would give you nightmares for the rest of your very short life. The cal pulley leader is still talking to you, pointing in various directions and clearly expecting responses that you cannot provide. Other people are starting to stare, and in Aztec society, being the center of negative attention was a fast track to becoming a human sacrifice. Okay, pause for a second. How many of you are already thinking, "I just explained that I'm from the future. Show them my iPhone, and they'd worship me as a god"? Drop a time traveler in the comments if that was your plan. Because here's the reality check. Showing advanced technology to people who believe in magic would not make you a god. It would make you a witch. And witches in Aztec society were dealt with in ways that make medieval witch trials look like gentle suggestions. Your stomach is starting to rumble, which brings up an interesting question. What exactly do you eat in Aztec times when you're a completely unprepared modern person with no money, no connections, and no understanding of local cuisine? The Calpulli leader, apparently tired of trying to communicate with what he assumes is either a foreign idiot or someone suffering from divine punishment, hands you off to an older woman who looks at you with the kind of maternal disapproval that transcends cultural barriers. She clearly thinks you're pathetic, but at least she seems willing to keep you alive long enough to figure out what's wrong with you. She leads you to what can generously be called a kitchen, basically an area with a fire pit, some clay pots, and a matote grinding stone that looks like it weighs about 500 pounds. The woman, let's call her grandmother, Deathstare, begins preparing what will be your first Aztec meal, and what a meal it is. First, there's atole, which is basically corn gruel. Imagine oatmeal, but made with corn instead of oats, and with the consistency of wallpaper paste. It's not terrible, but it's not good either. It's just ... there, filling, sustaining, the kind of food that says, you will not die today, but you will not enjoy living either. Then there are tortillas, except these aren't the fluffy, delicious tortillas you might be thinking of. These are flat, dense discs of corn that have the texture of cardboard and about as much flavor. You eat them because the alternative is starving, not because they bring you joy. But the real treat, and by treat, I mean thing that will haunt your dreams forever, is when Grandmother Deathstare offers you some protein. She reaches into a pot and pulls out what looks like chunks of meat, except the meat is darker than anything you've ever seen, and it has a smell that's somehow both appetizing and deeply wrong. She's speaking to you in Nahuatl, gesturing at the meat and nodding encouragingly. You take a bite, and it's actually not bad. Kind of tough, but flavorful, rich, almost like a cross between beef and pork, with a texture that's surprisingly satisfying. It's only when you see her making the same gesture she made earlier, pointing to a group of people walking by, then to the meat, then to her mouth, that you realize what you've just eaten. Congratulations, you've just consumed your first human flesh. Welcome to the Aztec Empire, where cannibalism isn't just acceptable, it's a religious duty. Now, before you start retching and swearing you'd never eat human meat, let me remind you that you've been awake for maybe an hour, you're starving, and you have absolutely no other options. In a survival situation, your modern moral compass becomes less of a guiding principle and more of a luxury you can't afford. The Aztecs practiced ritual cannibalism, but not because they were savage monsters. They did it because their religion demanded it, their society expected it, and their understanding of the world made it not just acceptable but necessary. To them, consuming the flesh of sacrificed warriors was a way of honoring the gods and sharing in divine power. To you, a modern person with modern sensibilities, it's absolutely horrifying. But here's the thing, you ate it, and you're going to eat it again, because the alternative is death, and your survival instinct is stronger than your cultural conditioning. Alright, I need to know how many of you think you could actually do this, and be honest. Eating human flesh to survive in a completely alien culture. Drop a survivor in the comments if you think you could handle it. Or a vegetarian if this is where you'd draw the line and accept death. Because we're not even close to the worst parts of your day yet. After your culturally traumatic breakfast, Grandmother Deathstare decides that you need to be useful, which means it's time for a trip to the market. And not just any market, the Tlatelolco market, which was the largest market in the Americas, and possibly the world. She hands you a basket, and through a series of gestures that involve pointing, miming, and what can only be described as aggressive eyebrow management, she makes it clear that you're going to help her shop. How hard could it be, right? You've been to markets before. You understand the concept of commerce. Oh, you sweet, naive fool. The Tlatelolco market was massive, capable of accommodating 60,000 people on a busy day. It was organized into sections based on what was being sold. Food here, textiles there, tools in another area, and ... other things ... in sections you really don't want to think about. As you follow Grandmother Death Stare through the crowded pathways, you're immediately overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of everything. The noise alone is enough to drive you insane. Thousands of people talking, haggling, arguing, and conducting business in a language you don't understand. All while vendors shout out their wares in what sounds like an auction being held inside a beehive. But it's the visual assault that really gets to you. In one section, there are vendors selling food that ranges from recognizable corn, beans, squash to absolutely mystifying insects, larvae, and things that might have been animals but are now unidentifiable. The smell of cooking meat mixes with spices you can't name and creates an olfactory experience that's somehow both appetizing and nauseating. In another section, there are textiles that are genuinely beautiful. Intricate weavings with patterns and colors that would make modern fashion designers weep with envy. But they're displayed alongside clothing made from materials you really don't want to identify too closely. And then there's the section that makes you realize just how far you are from your comfortable modern life. Picture this. You turn a corner, following your appointed shopping companion, and suddenly you're face to face with a market stall that's selling human skulls. Not replicas, not decorative items. Actual human skulls, cleaned and prepared for use in religious ceremonies. Next to the skull vendor, there's someone selling obsidian knives that are sharper than modern surgical instruments and designed specifically for cutting through human flesh and bone. The vendor demonstrates their sharpness by effortlessly slicing through a piece of leather that would require significant effort with a modern knife. In the next stall over, there are vendors selling the skins of sacrificed victims, prepared and treated for use in religious ceremonies. And people are examining these items with the same casual interest you might show when shopping for a new pair of shoes. This is where the reality of Aztec society really hits you. This isn't a culture that practiced human sacrifice as some kind of aberrant behavior. This is a culture where human sacrifice was so normal, so integrated into daily life, that the tools and byproducts of ritual murder were sold in the marketplace like any other commodity. Grandmother Death Stare notices your reaction, probably because you've gone pale and are standing frozen in horror, and she gives you a look that clearly says, "What is wrong with you?" This is perfectly normal, and to her, it is. Here's something that will blow your modern mind. The Aztec economy didn't use money as you understand it. Instead, they used a complex bartering system where the value of goods was measured in cacao beans, cotton cloaks, and quills filled with gold dust. This means that when Grandmother Death Stare starts haggling with vendors, you have absolutely no idea what anything costs, or whether you're getting a good deal. A handful of cacao beans might buy you a meal, or it might buy you a knife, or it might not buy you anything at all, depending on the quality of the beans and the mood of the vendor. The haggling process itself is an art form that you are spectacularly unqualified to appreciate. It involves not just negotiating prices, but also assessing the quality of goods through methods you've never seen before. Vendors will let customers smell, taste, touch, and even break small pieces off of items to test their quality. You watch as Grandmother Deathstare examines a piece of jade by holding it up to the light, tapping it with her fingernail to test its density, and then engaging in what can only be described as aggressive negotiation theater with the vendor. They shout at each other, gesture wildly, and appear to be on the verge of physical violence before suddenly shaking hands and completing the transaction. And through all of this, you're standing there holding a basket, trying to look useful, and failing spectacularly. Other shoppers are starting to notice you, and not in a good way. See, the thing about being in a completely foreign culture is that your very existence raises questions that people don't like having to answer. Who are you? Where are you from? Why are you dressed wrong? Why don't you speak properly? Why do you smell different? In modern society, being a weird foreigner might make you the subject of gossip or mild discrimination. In Aztec society, being a weird foreigner could make you the subject of human sacrifice. The Aztecs were deeply suspicious of outsiders, and for good reason. Their empire was built on conquest and maintained through intimidation. Foreign visitors were often spies, and spies were dealt with in ways that make waterboarding look like a spa treatment. So when you, a obviously foreign person with no understanding of local customs, start attracting attention in the middle of the largest market in the Americas, you're not just being socially awkward, you're being politically dangerous. And that's when things go from bad to worse. A group of men in elaborate feathered costumes and jade jewelry approach you, and Grandmother Deathstare. These aren't vendors or shoppers. These are officials, the kind of people who have the authority to arrest you, interrogate you, and quite possibly sacrifice you to the gods if they decide you're a threat to public order. They start speaking rapidly to Grandmother Deathstare, gesturing at you and clearly asking questions she can't answer. She's shaking her head, holding up her hands, and pointing back toward your Kalpali with the universal gesture of "this isn't my fault, I'm just trying to help." The officials aren't satisfied with her explanations. One of them steps forward and addresses you directly, speaking in a tone that suggests this is your one and only chance to explain yourself before things get very unpleasant. You try to respond, but all that comes out is nervous gibberish in English mixed with the few Spanish words you might remember from high school. This is apparently not what they were hoping to hear. Okay, real talk time. How many of you have ever been in a foreign country where you didn't speak the language and found yourself in trouble with authorities? Drop your experiences in the comments, because I guarantee you that whatever bureaucratic nightmare you experienced in modern times is nothing compared to what's about to happen here. Because in Aztec society, failure to properly identify yourself to authorities wasn't just a legal problem, it was a religious problem. And religious problems were solved with blood. The Aztec legal system was remarkably sophisticated and absolutely terrifying. They had courts, judges, legal procedures, and a complex set of laws that governed everything from theft to adultery to public drunkenness. They also had punishments that make modern prison systems look like luxury resorts. As the officials continue questioning you, you begin to understand that you're not just dealing with a language barrier, you're dealing with a complete breakdown of the legal and social systems that keep society functioning. Without the ability to identify yourself, prove your legitimacy, or explain your presence, you become a legal anomaly that the system doesn't know how to process. In modern society, being a legal anomaly might result in deportation, fines, or bureaucratic hassles. In Aztec society, being a legal anomaly was often solved by removing you from existence entirely. The officials confer among themselves while you stand there sweating and trying to think of some way to communicate your non-threatening intentions. Grandmother Death Stare is looking increasingly worried, which is not a good sign considering she's lived through decades of Aztec justice and probably knows exactly how these situations usually end. One of the officials produces what looks like a cord made of twisted fibers. This, you will learn too late, is a tool used for measuring the accuracy of testimony. In Aztec courts, witnesses and defendants were sometimes subjected to physical tests, designed to determine whether they were telling the truth. The official begins tying the cord around your wrist, while explaining something in Nahuatl that you can't understand, but definitely don't like the sound of. The other officials are nodding approvingly, as if this is a perfectly reasonable way to handle the situation. Here's what's actually happening. You're about to be subjected to a form of judicial torture, designed to determine whether you're lying about your identity. The cord will be tightened progressively until you either confess to whatever they think you've done wrong, or until you pass out from pain. If you confess, you'll be punished according to Aztec law, which might involve anything from slavery to death, depending on what crime they decide you've committed. If you don't confess, they'll assume you're either incredibly brave or supernaturally protected, which means you're either a great warrior who should be sacrificed to honor the gods, or a witch who should be sacrificed to appease the gods. Notice a pattern here. The cord is getting tighter. Your hand is starting to go numb. The officials are watching your face carefully, looking for signs of deception or supernatural resistance to pain. Grandmother Death Stare is backing away, clearly not wanting to be associated with whatever is about to happen to you. And that's when you make a decision that will either save your life or guarantee your death in the most spectacular way possible. You start singing. Not because you have a plan, but because you're terrified and your brain has basically shut down, leaving only your most basic instincts in control. And for some reason, your brain decides that the appropriate response to judicial torture is to belt out the chorus of whatever song was stuck in your head. When you woke up this morning, let's say it's Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond, because the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Sweet Caroline, ba ba ba, good times never seemed so good. The officials stop what they're doing and stare at you in complete bewilderment. The marketplace around you goes quiet as people stop their conversations to look at the strange foreigner, who is singing unknown songs while being interrogated by legal authorities. This is either the best idea you've ever had, or the worst. There is no middle ground. Here's the thing about Aztec religion. It was incredibly complex, with hundreds of gods who controlled every aspect of life, death, and everything in between. The Aztecs lived in constant fear of offending these gods, and they were always looking for signs of divine favor or divine wrath. When you start singing a song that no one has ever heard before, in a language that sounds like no earthly tongue, while displaying apparent immunity to pain because you're too terrified to feel anything, you create a situation that the officials are not equipped to handle through normal legal procedures. Are you a messenger from the gods? Are you possessed by evil spirits? Are you a powerful sorcerer who deserves respect and fear? Or are you just completely insane, which in many cultures is considered a sign of divine touch? The officials release the cord and step back, talking rapidly among themselves while gesturing at you with expressions that range from confusion to terror. Grandmother Death Stare looks like she's trying to decide whether to prostrate herself before you or run away as fast as possible. You keep singing, partly because you don't know what else to do, and partly because it seems to be working. The crowd that has gathered around you is growing larger, and their expressions are shifting from curiosity to something that might be awe or might be horror. So good, so good, so good. And then someone in the crowd shouts something in Nahuatl that causes everyone else to either drop to their knees or scatter in terror. You don't know what they said, but from the reaction, it was either he's a god, or he's going to kill us all. Either way, the immediate threat of judicial torture has passed, but you've created a much bigger problem. See, in Aztec society, claiming to be divine, or allowing others to believe you might be divine, wasn't just blasphemy, it was treason against the entire cosmic order. The gods had their place, humans had their place, and anything that disrupted that order threatened the stability of the universe. If people start believing you're a god, the priests will have to investigate. And priestly investigations in Aztec society made the Spanish Inquisition look like a friendly chat over coffee. But if people decide you're a dangerous sorcerer or demon, the warriors will have to deal with you. And warrior solutions to supernatural problems involved sharp objects and altars stained with the blood of thousands of previous supernatural problems. You've gone from being a legal anomaly to being a religious crisis, which is like going from having a parking ticket to being wanted for terrorism. The officials are clearly out of their depth. They're backing away from you while making gestures that are either protective wards against evil magic or signs of respect for divine power. Either way, they're not arresting you, which is good, but they're also not leaving, which is bad, because it means they're waiting for someone with higher authority to show up and decide what to do with you. And in the Aztec Empire, higher authority usually meant priests. Okay, I have to ask, how many of you are sitting there thinking, I would have handled this completely differently? Drop your alternative strategies in the comments, because I guarantee you that whatever plan you think you have wouldn't work any better in a society where the wrong gesture could get you ritually murdered. Because here's what's coming next: the priests. In Aztec society, priests weren't the kindly community leaders you might be thinking of. These were men who had dedicated their lives to appeasing gods who demanded blood, pain, and death on a regular basis. They were walking encyclopedias of ritual torture techniques, experts in human anatomy, and completely convinced that the continued existence of the universe depended on their willingness to kill people in creatively horrible ways. When you see them approaching through the crowd, you immediately understand that your brief moment of accidental divine status is about to be tested in ways you really don't want to think about. There are 3 of them, dressed in black robes that are stained with what you really hope is just ceremonial paint, but strongly suspect is something much worse. Their hair is long and matted with blood, actual human blood, which they use as a kind of religious styling gel. Their fingernails are grown long and sharpened to points, and their skin is covered in scars from various ritual self-mutilation practices. They smell like death, smoke, and something chemical that makes your eyes water. The crowd parts before them like they're radioactive, which in a spiritual sense they basically are. These aren't people you want to attract the attention of under any circumstances, and you've just become the center of their professional interest. The lead priest, let's call him Father Nightmare, approaches you with the kind of calm confidence that comes from having personally killed hundreds of people in the name of religious duty. He speaks to you in Nahuatl, but his tone is different from the officials. Where they were confused and uncertain, he sounds like someone conducting a scientific experiment, which, in a way, he is. You try to back away, but the crowd has formed a circle around you, and there's nowhere to go. Grandmother Death Stare has completely disappeared, probably deciding that her civic duty doesn't extend to being associated with whatever supernatural weirdness you represent. Father Nightmare reaches into his robes and pulls out a small obsidian blade that gleams like black glass in the sunlight. This isn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It's a diagnostic tool. He's going to test whether you bleed like a human or something else entirely. Here's something you need to understand about obsidian. When properly knapped, it can be sharper than modern surgical steel. The Aztecs created obsidian blades that were only a few molecules thick at the edge, capable of cutting through skin so cleanly that you don't feel it until you see the blood. Father Nightmare is explaining something to the crowd while displaying the blade, probably giving them a lecture on the theological implications of your strange behavior and the proper procedures for determining whether someone is human, divine, or demonic. You, meanwhile, are standing there trying to figure out how to communicate. I'm just a lost tourist from the 21st century. Please don't cut me in a language you don't speak to people, whose entire worldview is based on concepts you can't comprehend. The priest steps closer, and you can see that his eyes are completely calm. He's not angry or excited or cruel. He's just doing his job, which happens to involve determining your spiritual nature through methods that might kill you. You try to speak, to explain, to plead, but all that comes out is more terrified gibberish, mixed with fragments of songs and half-remembered phrases in languages that haven't been invented yet. This does not improve your situation. Father Nightmare nods approvingly, as if your incoherent babbling confirms whatever theory he's developed about your nature. He says something to the other priests, who respond by pulling out additional tools that you really don't want to identify too closely. And that's when you realize that you're about to become the subject of a theological experiment that will determine whether you're human, divine, or demonic, based on how you react to being systematically tortured. But just as Father Nightmare raises his obsidian blade to begin his investigation, something happens that changes everything. A horn sounds in the distance. Not just any horn, a conch shell horn that echoes across the city with a deep, resonant note that makes your bones vibrate. The crowd immediately stops what they're doing and looks toward the sound with expressions of excitement and terror. The priests pause in their examination of you and exchange glances that suggest this horn means something significant. Father Nightmare sheathes his blade and speaks rapidly to his companions, gesturing toward the direction of the horn sound. You don't know what the horn means, but from everyone's reaction, it's either very good news or very bad news. Given your luck so far, it's probably very bad news. One of the younger priests runs off toward the sound, leaving you with Father Nightmare and his remaining companion. They're clearly torn between their professional duty to determine your spiritual nature and their obligation to respond to whatever the horn is announcing. And then the younger priest comes running back, shouting something that makes everyone in the crowd either cheer or scream in terror. Alright, I need predictions in the comments. What do you think the horn is announcing? War, human sacrifice festival, the arrival of Spanish conquistadors, royal wedding, volcanic eruption. Drop your guesses, because what's actually happening is going to make your day significantly worse in ways you haven't even imagined yet. The horn you just heard was announcing the beginning of Zip-Totec's festival, the festival of the flayed god. If you're not familiar with Aztec theology, Zip-Totec was the god of agriculture, seasons, and renewal. He was also the god of flaying people alive and wearing their skins like clothing. I'm not making this up. The Aztecs believed that just as corn kernels are removed from their husks to grow into new plants, humans needed to be removed from their skins to ensure the renewal of life and the fertility of crops. This made perfect sense to them, and it's going to make perfect sense to everyone around you, which is why what happens next is going to be so spectacularly awful for you personally. When the young priest returns with the news about the festival, Father Nightmare's entire demeanor changes. Where before he was conducting a careful theological investigation, now he's looking at you like you're a gift from the gods themselves. Because here's the thing, for the festival of the flayed god, The priests need victims. Not just any victims. They need special victims, whose sacrifice will be particularly pleasing to Zyptotec and you, a mysterious stranger with possible divine connections, who appeared just as the festival was beginning, are exactly the kind of special victim they've been praying for. Father Nightmare speaks to the crowd in a voice that carries the kind of religious authority that makes people do things they would never normally consider. He's explaining that your appearance at this exact moment is clearly a sign from Zyptotec, that your strange behavior and unknown songs are evidence that you've been chosen by the god himself. The crowd is nodding along, getting more excited with each word. These aren't bloodthirsty savages. These are devout believers, who genuinely think that sacrificing you will ensure good harvests, healthy children, and the continued existence of the world, which doesn't make the situation any less terrifying for you. You try to run. This is a mistake. Running from priests during a religious festival is like confessing to whatever they think you're guilty of. It confirms that you're either guilty of crimes against the gods, or that you're a supernatural being trying to escape divine justice, or that you're a coward unworthy of the honor they're about to bestow upon you. The crowd doesn't chase you, they don't need to. You're on an island city connected to the mainland by 3 narrow causeways, surrounded by a lake that's filled with canoes, operated by people who are definitely not going to help a fleeing sacrifice escape divine justice. Where exactly are you planning to run to? You make it maybe 50 yards through the crowded marketplace before you slam into a wall of human bodies. Not metaphorically, literally, a group of Aztec warriors, alerted by the crowds, shouting, form a living barrier that stops your escape attempt with the efficiency of a police roadblock. These aren't the officials from earlier. These are eagle warriors and jaguar warriors, elite fighters whose job is to capture enemies alive for sacrifice, and who are very, very good at their job. They're wearing costumes that make them look like humanoid birds and cats, covered in feathers and fur and jade ornaments that probably cost more than most people's houses. They're also armed with Makuaweetal wooden clubs, embedded with obsidian blades that can decapitate a horse with a single swing. Not that you know what a Makuaweetal is, because you're too busy hyperventilating and trying not to wet yourself. The lead warrior, let's call him Captain Feathers, looks you up and down with the kind of professional assessment that predators give to prey. He's calculating your value as a sacrifice, estimating how much fight you'll put up, and probably wondering whether you'll make interesting sounds when they start the flaying process. Father Nightmare catches up with you, and he's actually smiling now. Not a cruel smile, a genuinely happy smile, like someone who just found out they won the lottery. He speaks to Captain Feathers in rapid Nahuatl, gesturing at you with obvious excitement. You don't need to understand the language to get the gist of the conversation. Look what the gods sent us for the festival. Is he suitable for the ceremony? Oh, he's perfect. Strange behavior, unknown origins, possibly divine. Zyptotec will be so pleased. Excellent. We'll prepare him immediately. Okay, time for a reality check. How many of you were thinking, this is where I'd fight back and show them what modern self-defense techniques can do? Drop a warrior in the comments if you think you could take on a group of elite Aztec fighters whose entire career is built around capturing people alive for religious ceremonies. Because here's the thing about fighting Aztec warriors. They don't want to kill you. They want to capture you intact so you can be properly sacrificed according to religious protocols. This means they're going to use non-lethal techniques that are specifically designed to subdue people without seriously injuring them. You, on the other hand, are going to fight like your life depends on it, because it does. But you're going to be fighting against people who have trained for this exact scenario their entire lives, using weapons and techniques you've never seen before, while surrounded by hundreds of people who want to see you captured and sacrificed. How do you think that's going to go? When Captain Feathers decides it's time to capture you properly, he doesn't rush in swinging his Makua Weetle like some kind of berserker. He's a professional, and professionals have methods. First, he signals to his men, who spread out in a perfect circle around you. These aren't random soldiers, they're specialists who have been training in capture techniques since childhood. They know exactly how to take down a panicked, desperate person without killing them, and they've done it hundreds of times before. Second, he produces a weapon you've never seen before. A net made of maguey fibers that's weighted with small stones around the edges. This isn't a fishing net. This is a human catching net, designed specifically for subduing sacrifice victims who are trying to escape their divine destiny. Third, he starts talking to you in a calm, almost gentle voice, as if he's trying to soothe a frightened animal, which, from his perspective, is exactly what he's doing. You're a gift from the gods who's scared and confused, and he wants to reassure you that everything is going to be fine. Of course, his definition of fine involves you being ritually flayed alive, but that's beside the point. You try to back away, but there's nowhere to go. The circle of warriors is tightening. The crowd is pressing closer to get a better view, and Father Nightmare is practically vibrating with religious excitement. This is when your modern fight-or-flight response kicks in, flooding your system with adrenaline and making you do something incredibly stupid. You try to fight your way out. You grab a piece of pottery from a nearby market stall and throw it at Captain Feathers. It shatters harmlessly against his feathered armor, but the gesture gets his attention in a way that's not good for your long-term health prospects. You see, throwing things at Aztec warriors isn't just rude, it's insulting to their professional pride. Captain Feathers has captured hundreds of enemies in actual combat, faced down Spanish conquistadors with metal armor and horses, and survived battles that would make modern special forces weep, and you just threw a pot at him. His expression changes from patient professionalism to mild annoyance, like a parent dealing with a toddler who's having a tantrum. He says something to his men that makes them laugh, probably along the lines of "watch this." And then he demonstrates why Aztec warriors were feared throughout Mesoamerica. The net flies through the air with perfect accuracy, expanding as it travels to catch you in its weighted embrace. You try to dodge, but the net is designed to compensate for dodging the stones around the edge, wrap around your legs and arms, binding you in a way that makes struggling only tighten the restraints. You fall to the ground, tangled in maguey fibers and your own panic, while Captain Feathers walks over with the casual confidence of someone who just completed a routine task. And that's when you learn something important about Aztec capture techniques. They're designed not just to subdue you, but to do it in a way that demonstrates the superiority of Aztec military technology to anyone watching. This isn't just about capturing one confused foreigner. It's about showing the crowd that the Aztec military is so advanced, so professional, that they can take down any enemy with minimal effort. It's psychological warfare disguised as law enforcement. The warriors lift you off the ground, still wrapped in the net, and begin carrying you through the marketplace like a prize fish. The crowd follows, cheering and chanting in Nahuatl, celebrating the fact that the gods have provided such an excellent sacrifice for the festival. And you, bouncing along in a net made of plant fibers, get to experience the unique humiliation of being paraded through an ancient city as a religious offering. Real talk, How many of you have ever been in a situation where you were completely powerless and had to rely on other people's goodwill to survive? Drop your experiences in the comments, because what's about to happen next is going to test every survival instinct you never knew you had. Because we're heading to the temple, and in Aztec temples, things happen that make everything you've experienced so far look like a minor inconvenience. The Templo Maya, the great temple of Tenochtitlan, was one of the most impressive architectural achievements in the pre-Columbian Americas. It was also one of the most terrifying places on Earth, designed specifically to facilitate the industrial-scale murder of human beings in the name of religious devotion. As the warriors carry you toward the temple, you get your first good look at the structure that's going to be the site of your probably very soon death. It's a massive stepped pyramid, rising 200 feet into the sky, with twin shrines at the top dedicated to two gods who both demand human sacrifice on a regular basis. The entire structure is covered in intricate stone carvings that tell the story of Aztec cosmology, military conquest, and religious practice. Under normal circumstances, you might appreciate the artistic achievement. Under current circumstances, you're more focused on the dark stains covering the steps, stains that you're pretty sure aren't just ceremonial paint. The smell hits you before you can see the details clearly. It's the smell of old blood, burned flesh, and something sweet and cloying that makes your stomach turn. This is the smell of a place where thousands of people have died in ways that would make horror movie directors quit their jobs and become accountants. As you're carried up the steps, and there are a lot of steps, each one steeper and more intimidating than the last, you start to notice details that make you realize just how organized and systematic Aztec human sacrifice really was. There are grooves carved into the stone steps, channels designed to direct the flow of blood down the pyramid's sides. There are carved skulls decorating the walls, not as artistic flourishes, but as literal displays of the temple's previous victims. And there are priests stationed at regular intervals, each one carrying tools and wearing expressions of professional competence that would be comforting in any other context. The crowd is following you up the pyramid, chanting and singing in celebration of the god's generosity in providing such an excellent sacrifice. These aren't bloodthirsty monsters. They're devout believers who genuinely think that your death will help ensure the continued existence of the universe. Which doesn't make you feel any better about the situation. At the top of the pyramid, you get your first look at the altar where the actual sacrificing happens. It's a curved stone platform designed specifically for human anatomy. The curve forces the victim's chest to arch upward, making it easier for the priest to access the heart with maximum efficiency. The stone is so stained with blood that it's changed color permanently. The surface is polished smooth by the passage of countless bodies, and there are grooves worn into the stone by the repeated use of obsidian knives. Father Nightmare is waiting for you at the altar, along with several other priests who are preparing the tools and materials needed for your sacrifice. They've changed into their ceremonial robes, which are even more horrifying than their everyday clothes. These robes are made from the skins of previous sacrifice victims, carefully prepared and decorated with jewels and feathers. The priests are literally wearing the bodies of people who died in this exact spot, probably people who were in your exact situation just days or weeks ago, and they're doing it as a sign of religious devotion and respect for the gods. One of the priests approaches you with a clay cup filled with liquid that smells like fermented corn and something bitter. He's speaking in Nahuatl, probably explaining that this drink will help ease your transition from life to divine service. The drink is pulque mixed with various herbs, some of which are hallucinogenic, and some of which are designed to make you more compliant and less likely to struggle during the sacrifice. It's essentially a pre-execution cocktail designed to make the whole process easier for everyone involved, except you. Okay, honest question time. If you were in this situation, would you drink the mystery liquid that might make your death easier, or would you refuse it and face whatever's coming with full awareness? Drop, drink, or refuse in the comments, because this is actually a more complex decision than you might think. The Aztecs designed their sacrifice rituals to be as painless as possible for the victim, not out of mercy, but because they believed that willing, peaceful sacrifice was more pleasing to the gods than the sacrifice of someone who was fighting and screaming. If you drink the pulque, you'll be chemically compliant but aware of what's happening. If you refuse, you'll face the full horror of the situation, but you'll also maintain your human dignity and free will until the very end. What's your choice while you're trying to decide whether to drink the ritual cocktail or maintain your sobriety for your own execution? Father Nightmare begins explaining to the crowd the theological significance of what's about to happen to you. And this is where you realize that Aztec human sacrifice wasn't just random violence. It was a sophisticated religious system based on complex beliefs about the nature of reality, the relationship between gods and humans, and the cosmic forces that keep the universe functioning. According to Aztec theology, the gods sacrificed themselves to create the world and keep it running. The sun god dies every night and is reborn every morning through an act of divine sacrifice. The rain god spills his own blood to water the crops. The earth goddess allows herself to be torn apart so that plants can grow from her body. In this cosmological system, human sacrifice isn't murder, it's participation in the fundamental process that keeps reality from collapsing. When the priests kill you, they're not committing a crime, they're performing a sacred duty that ensures the continued existence of everything. Father Nightmare is explaining all of this to the crowd while gesturing at you with obvious pride. You are about to become part of the cosmic order. Your death will feed the gods who keep the world alive, and your sacrifice will ensure that the sun rises tomorrow and the crops grow and the children are born healthy. From their perspective, you should be honored. Here's what makes this so psychologically devastating. The Aztecs aren't wrong about the interconnectedness of life and death. Modern ecology tells us the same thing, that death feeds life. The systems depend on cycles of creation and destruction. The individual organisms sacrifice themselves for the survival of larger systems. The only difference is that the Aztecs personalized these natural processes as gods who demanded conscious, intentional sacrifice, while modern science describes them as impersonal forces that operate without regard for human intentions. But if you're the one being sacrificed, that distinction doesn't matter much. The priests are beginning to chant now, a low, rhythmic sound that echoes off the stone walls of the temple and seems to vibrate through your bones. The crowd is joining in, thousands of voices creating a sound that's both beautiful and terrifying. This isn't a mob calling for blood. This is a congregation participating in their most sacred ritual, convinced that they're about to witness an act of divine communion that will benefit everyone in their society. And that's when you make a decision that surprises everyone, including yourself. Instead of drinking the pulque or refusing it, instead of struggling or pleading or trying to escape, you start asking questions. Not in English. Your brain has finally figured out that English isn't going to help you here. Instead, you start using gestures, pointing at things, trying to communicate through the universal language of curiosity. You point at the altar, then at yourself, then at the sky, with a questioning expression. You point at the priests, then at the crowd, then at the temple, clearly asking why, how, what does this mean? This creates a problem that the priests weren't expecting. C. Aztec religious ritual was designed to work with willing victims who understood and accepted their role in the cosmic order, or with unwilling victims who could be processed quickly before they caused disruptions. But you're creating a third category, the curious victim who wants to understand what's happening to them. Father Nightmare pauses in his preparations and looks at you with genuine confusion. Your questions are disrupting the ritual flow, but they're also demonstrating a kind of intellectual engagement with Aztec theology that suggests you might be more than just a random sacrifice. Okay, this is where I need to know what you're thinking. Are you sitting there going, why would anyone try to have a theological discussion while they're about to be murdered? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because what happens next is going to depend entirely on whether the Aztec priests decide that your curiosity is a sign of divine wisdom or evidence that you're trying to delay your inevitable fate. And in Aztec society, the difference between those two interpretations could literally be the difference between life and death. Your questions create something that rarely happens in Aztec sacrifice rituals, a theological debate. Father Nightmare and his fellow priests start discussing among themselves in rapid Nahuatl, gesturing at you and clearly debating the implications of your behavior. The crowd is getting restless. They came here to witness a sacrifice, not to watch priests have an academic discussion. But here's the thing about Aztec priests. They were intellectuals first and executioners second. These were men who had spent decades studying complex theological systems, memorizing vast amounts of religious knowledge, and contemplating the deepest questions about the nature of existence. When you demonstrate genuine intellectual curiosity about their beliefs, you're appealing to the part of their personality that got them into the priesthood in the first place. One of the younger priests, let's call him Brother Obsidian, approaches you with what looks like a piece of bark paper covered in pictographs. He's clearly excited about the opportunity to explain Aztec cosmology to someone who seems genuinely interested. Through a combination of pointing, gesturing, and basic drawing, he begins explaining the Aztec creation myth, how the gods sacrificed themselves to create the sun, how the world has been created and destroyed 4 times already, and how human sacrifice is necessary to prevent the 5th destruction. You nod along, asking more questions through gestures, pointing at different parts of his diagrams, and clearly trying to understand the logical structure of their beliefs. This is where you discover something fascinating about Aztec theology. It's actually remarkably sophisticated and internally consistent. The gods aren't arbitrary tyrants, demanding random violence. They're part of a complex system of cosmic forces that requires specific types of energy to function properly. Human sacrifice, from the Aztec perspective, isn't about cruelty or power. It's about maintaining the energy balance that keeps the universe stable. The gods gave their own blood to create the world, so humans must give their blood to maintain it. It's wrong, obviously, from a modern moral perspective. But it's not randomly wrong. It's systematically wrong, based on a coherent set of assumptions about how reality works. And the more you demonstrate that you understand their logical system, the more the priests begin to wonder whether killing you might actually be counterproductive to their goals. Because here's the thing. If you're genuinely interested in learning about Aztec theology, and if you demonstrate the intellectual capacity to understand complex religious concepts, then maybe you're not just a random sacrifice. Maybe you're someone who could become a valuable addition to their priestly class. Father Nightmare calls for a halt to the sacrifice preparations and begins what can only be described as an impromptu theological examination. He's going to test your understanding of Aztec religious concepts to determine whether you're worth keeping alive as a potential convert. This is your chance. Your one opportunity to convince a group of highly educated religious fanatics that you're more valuable alive than dead. The problem is that you don't actually know anything about Aztec theology beyond what you've learned in the last few minutes from Brother Obsidian's pictograph lesson. You're about to take the most important test of your life on material you've never studied, in a language you don't speak, with your life as the stakes. No pressure. Father Nightmare produces another piece of bark paper, this one showing what looks like a complex diagram of the Aztec cosmos. He points to various parts of the diagram and asks questions in Nahuatl, clearly testing your understanding of the relationships between different gods and cosmic forces. You study the diagram carefully, trying to apply basic logic and pattern recognition to figure out what he's asking. The diagram shows layers, probably representing different levels of reality. There are symbols that repeat in different contexts, probably representing gods or cosmic forces that operate in multiple domains. You point to one of the repeating symbols, then to another part of the diagram where the same symbol appears, and make a questioning gesture that suggests you're asking about the relationship between them. Father Nightmare nods approvingly. You've just demonstrated that you can recognize patterns and ask intelligent questions about theological relationships. All right, this is it. The moment where your fate is decided based on whether you can fake your way through an advanced theology exam in a subject you know nothing about. How many of you think you could pull this off? Drop theologian if you think you could convince Aztec priests that you understand their religious system. Or sacrifice if you think this is where your ancient adventure would end. Because what happens next is going to determine whether you live to see another sunrise or become part of the cosmic energy system that keeps the Aztec universe functioning. The theological examination continues for what feels like hours, but is probably only 20 or 30 minutes. Father Nightmare and his colleagues take turns showing you different religious diagrams, asking questions through gestures and pictographs, and evaluating your responses with the kind of careful attention that professors give to doctoral candidates. You're operating on pure adrenaline and intuition, trying to recognize patterns and relationships in a symbol system you've never seen before, while surrounded by people who will kill you if you fail their test. It's like taking the SATs, except instead of affecting your college applications, the results determine whether you get to keep your heart inside your chest cavity. Some of the questions you can figure out through logic. When they show you a diagram of the solar cycle and point to different positions of the sun, you can make educated guesses about which gods are associated with dawn, noon, and sunset. When they show you agricultural diagrams, you can identify relationships between planting, growing, and harvesting. Other questions are completely mystifying. When they show you complex diagrams of the underworld with multiple layers and strange creatures, you have no choice but to guess and hope that your guesses demonstrate some kind of intellectual engagement, rather than random confusion. But here's what you gradually realize. The priests aren't just testing your knowledge of specific religious facts. They're testing your ability to think systematically about complex theological relationships. When you get a specific detail wrong but demonstrate that you understand the underlying logical structure of their religious system, they seem pleased. When you ask questions that show you're thinking about how different parts of their cosmology relate to each other, they get excited. You're not just trying to pass a test, you're accidentally demonstrating the kind of intellectual curiosity and systematic thinking that the Aztec priestly class valued most highly. And that's what saves your life. After what feels like the longest academic examination in human history, Father Nightmare and his colleagues confer among themselves, while you stand there sweating and trying to read their expressions for clues about whether you've passed or failed. The crowd has gotten bored and started to disperse, disappointed that the promised sacrifice has turned into what looks like a very long and boring lecture. Even Captain Feathers and his warriors look like they're wondering whether they should stick around or go find something more exciting to do. Finally, Father Nightmare approaches you with an expression that you can't quite read. He speaks to you in Nahuatl, his tone serious but not angry. Then he gestures to one of the younger priests, who approaches with what looks like a set of white robes. You're not being sacrificed, you're being recruited. The Aztec priests have decided that your intellectual curiosity and apparent ability to understand complex theological concepts make you a valuable potential addition to their religious hierarchy. Instead of killing you to feed the gods, they're going to train you to help them kill other people to feed the gods. This is either the best possible outcome of your situation or the worst, depending on how you feel about becoming an accessory to industrial-scale human sacrifice. Okay, moral dilemma time. If you were in this situation, would you accept the offer to become an Aztec priest, knowing that it would save your life but require you to participate in human sacrifice? Drop priest if you'd take the deal and try to reform the system from within. Or martyr if you'd rather die than become complicit in murder. Because this is where things get really complicated from an ethical standpoint. You've just been offered the chance to survive in Aztec society, but survival comes with a price that most modern people would find morally unacceptable. What's your choice? The white robes they're offering you aren't just clothing, they're a uniform that represents one of the most morally complex offers in human history. Accept the robes, and you become part of the Aztec priestly class. You get to live, you get access to food, shelter, and education, and you become one of the most respected members of society. You also become responsible for planning, organizing, and carrying out the ritual murder of potentially thousands of innocent people over the course of your priestly career. Refuse the robes, and you maintain your moral integrity while they sacrifice you to the gods right here, right now, in front of whatever's left of the crowd. There's no middle ground, no negotiating, no let me think about it and get back to you. This is a binary choice with permanent consequences, and you have about 30 seconds to make it before Father Nightmare decides that your hesitation means you're not truly committed to joining their religious order. Here's what makes this choice so psychologically devastating. The Aztecs aren't evil people. They're not sadistic monsters who enjoy causing pain. They're devout believers in a religious system that they're absolutely convinced is necessary for the continued existence of the universe. From their perspective, offering you a position in the priesthood isn't recruiting you to become a murderer. It's inviting you to become a guardian of cosmic order, a protector of reality itself. They genuinely believe that without human sacrifice, the sun will stop rising, the crops will fail, and everything that exists will collapse into chaos. In their worldview, priests aren't killers. They're heroes who perform the most important and difficult job in society, which doesn't change the fact that the job involves cutting people's hearts out with obsidian knives. You stand there holding the white robes, feeling the weight of a decision that will define the rest of your life. Around you, the priests are watching with expressions of patient expectation, waiting for you to demonstrate your commitment to their sacred cause. This is where you confront one of the fundamental questions of human existence. Is it better to live as part of a system you find morally abhorrent, or to die maintaining your ethical principles? Most people, when asked this question in the abstract, say they would choose death over moral compromise. But most people have never been standing on top of an Aztec pyramid. surrounded by priests holding obsidian knives, making the choice with full awareness of what death actually means. Death means you never see another sunset. You never taste food again, never feel the warmth of human contact, never experience joy or love or discovery or any of the things that make life worth living. Death means the end of every possibility, every potential experience, every chance to make a positive difference in the world. But moral compromise means becoming complicit in a system that causes immense suffering to innocent people. It means using your intelligence and talents to make that system more efficient, more effective at destroying human lives. I want you to really think about this, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Imagine yourself in this situation, feeling the weight of those robes in your hands, smelling the blood on the altar behind you, seeing the expectant faces of the priests around you. What would you actually do? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And be truthful. This isn't about what you think you should do, or what would make you look good to other people. This is about what you would actually do if your life depended on it. Because here's what you decide to do, ... You put on the robes. Not because you're morally compromised, not because you're a coward, but because you make a calculation that staying alive gives you more opportunities to eventually do good than dying as a martyr would. Maybe you can reform the system from within. Maybe you can find ways to reduce the number of sacrifices, or convince the priests that the gods would be satisfied with animal sacrifices instead of human ones. Maybe you can use your position to help people escape, or to gather information that could eventually be used to change Aztec society. Or maybe you're just telling yourself these things to justify choosing survival over principle. Either way, the moment you put on those white robes, your life as a modern person ends, and your life as an Aztec priest begins. The priests immediately begin your education in the complex art of serving gods who demand blood. This isn't a weekend seminar. This is an intensive, years-long program that will transform you from a confused foreigner into a competent religious professional. First, you have to learn Nahuatl properly. Not just enough to order food in the market, but fluently enough to conduct complex religious ceremonies, interpret theological texts, and engage in sophisticated discussions about cosmological theory. This means spending hours every day memorizing vocabulary, practicing pronunciation, and studying the intricate pictographic writing system that the Aztecs used to record their religious knowledge. Second, you have to learn Aztec theology in detail. Every god, every ritual, every cosmic relationship, every theological concept that governs how the universe works according to Aztec belief. This is like getting a PhD in a religious system that's completely alien to everything you thought you knew about how the world works. Third, you have to learn the practical skills of priesthood. How to prepare sacrificial victims, how to use obsidian knives effectively, how to read omens and interpret divine signs, how to organize festivals and ceremonies that involve the ritual murder of dozens or hundreds of people. And here's the thing that's going to eat at you every day. You're getting really good at it. Your modern education actually gives you advantages that native-born Aztec priests don't have. You're used to systematic thinking, logical analysis, and pattern recognition. You can see relationships and connections in Aztec theology that help you understand their religious system faster and more thoroughly than many of your colleagues. Within months, you're being recognized as one of the most promising young priests in the temple hierarchy. Within a year, you're being given responsibilities that normally take decades to earn. And every step up the priestly ladder means more involvement in human sacrifice. It starts with minor roles: preparing the altar, organizing the ceremonial tools, managing the crowds during festivals. But gradually, you're given more direct responsibilities. You're asked to hold victims while more senior priests perform the actual sacrifice. You're taught to read omens in the patterns of blood flow. You're trained to remove hearts with the efficiency and precision that the gods demand. And the worst part, you discover that you have a talent for it. Your steady hands, your attention to detail, your ability to remain calm under pressure, all of these modern skills translate surprisingly well to the ancient art of ritual murder. You become known for your precision, your efficiency, your ability to perform sacrifices with the kind of technical excellence that honors the gods and impresses your fellow priests. You're not just surviving in Aztec society, you're succeeding in it. This is the part where I need to know. How many of you are judging the hypothetical person in this scenario for adapting so well to a morally horrific situation? Drop judge if you think adaptation to evil is always morally wrong, or understand if you think survival sometimes requires moral compromises that can't be judged by people who haven't faced the same choices. Because what happens next is going to test every assumption you have about moral responsibility, cultural relativism, and the lengths people will go to in order to survive. 3 years into your career as an Aztec priest, something happens that changes everything. You perform your first independent human sacrifice. It's during a minor festival dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain god, and the victim is a young warrior who was captured in a recent battle with a neighboring city-state. He's about your age, he's brave, and he's completely resigned to his fate, because he genuinely believes that dying as a sacrifice will ensure his place in the warrior's paradise. As you raise the obsidian knife above his chest, you realize that this moment represents the final transformation of your identity. You're no longer a modern person trapped in an ancient world. You're an Aztec priest performing a sacred duty. The knife goes in cleanly. Your technique is perfect, and the warrior dies quickly with minimal suffering. The small crowd cheers. The other priests nod approvingly. And you hold up the still beating heart to honor Tlaloc with the gift of human life. And you feel ... proud. Not guilty. Not horrified, not traumatized, proud. You've just performed a complex religious ritual with technical excellence, and you're satisfied with your competence in the same way you might be satisfied with giving a good presentation at work or successfully completing a difficult project. This is the moment when you understand that human psychology is far more adaptable than most people want to believe. Given enough time, enough social pressure, and enough immersion in a different cultural context, almost anyone can learn to normalize almost anything. You didn't become a monster, you became a professional. Over the following months, you performed dozens more sacrifices. Each one gets easier, not because you become more callous, but because you become more skilled. You develop techniques for minimizing victim suffering, methods for making the ceremonies more meaningful for the crowds, innovations in ritual procedure that earn you recognition from senior priests. You're not just participating in the system, you're improving it. And that's when you realize that your original plan to reform the system from within was naive fantasy. The system doesn't need reform. From the Aztec perspective, the system works perfectly. It provides social cohesion, religious meaning, political control, and cosmic stability all at the same time. The problem isn't that the system is broken. The problem is that you're now part of a system that works exactly as intended, and what it's intended to do is kill people. Real talk time. How many of you are thinking, I would never adapt like this? I would maintain my moral principles no matter what. Drop your thoughts in the comments, but be honest with yourself. We're talking about 3 years of daily immersion in a culture where human sacrifice is not just accepted, but considered the most noble and necessary work in society, where everyone you respect, everyone you depend on for survival, everyone you've learned to care about believes that what you're doing is literally saving the world. Because here's what happens in year 4. You stop thinking of yourself as a time traveler who's trapped in the wrong century. You start thinking of yourself as an Aztec priest who occasionally has strange dreams about a world with metal birds that carry people through the sky and boxes that show moving pictures. By your 5th year as a priest, you've been promoted to a position of significant responsibility within the temple hierarchy. You're now involved in planning major festivals, training junior priests, and advising on theological questions that affect the entire city. You speak Nahuatl fluently, you dream in pictographs, and you've developed friendships with other priests that are based on genuine mutual respect and shared commitment to what you all believe is sacred work. When Spanish conquistadors first arrive on the coast, you hear about these strange pale foreigners with their metal weapons and 4-legged animals, and your first reaction isn't excitement about potential rescue. Your first reaction is concern about how these foreigners might disrupt the religious practices that keep the universe stable. You've become genuinely Aztec in your thinking. This is when you face the most psychologically devastating realization of your entire experience. You can no longer clearly remember what your original moral objections to human sacrifice were based on. You remember that you used to think it was wrong, but when you try to reconstruct the logical arguments against it, they seem weak and unconvincing compared to the sophisticated theological framework you've spent years studying. The Aztec justifications for sacrifice make sense to you now in ways that your original modern objections no longer do. You've been intellectually colonized by a completely different moral system, and you didn't even notice it happening. When you try to remember your previous life, the details are fuzzy and inconsistent. Did you really live in a world where people traveled in metal vehicles that moved without being pulled by animals? Did you really communicate with people on the other side of the world through devices that fit in your hand? Did you really live in buildings that were taller than pyramids but weren't temples? It all seems like fantasy now, like stories you might have made up to entertain yourself during the difficult early days of your priestly training. And that's when the Spanish arrive in Tenochtitlan. Hernan Cortes and his conquistadors march into the city in 1519. And you're among the priests who are called upon to advise Moctezuma about how to handle these strange foreigners with their incomprehensible technology and bizarre religious beliefs. When you see the Spanish for the first time, something stirs in the back of your mind. A memory, or maybe just a dream, of people who look like these foreigners. People with pale skin and metal weapons and animals that carry them across great distances. But the memory is vague and uncertain, like trying to remember a half-forgotten childhood fantasy. Cortes demands to meet with the high priests, and you're selected to be part of the delegation because of your reputation for intelligence and theological sophistication. When you stand before these Spanish conquistadors, you have no idea that you're looking at people from your own time period. People who share your original cultural background. People who might be able to help you remember who you used to be. All you see are dangerous foreigners who threaten the religious order that you've devoted your life to protecting. When Cortes begins his speeches about Christianity and the Spanish crown, demanding that the Aztecs abandon their gods and submit to foreign rule, your reaction isn't relief or recognition. Your reaction is outrage at the blasphemy these ignorant foreigners are speaking against the divine order that keeps the world functioning. You translate Cortes' demands for the other priests, and you do it with the kind of indignation that comes from hearing someone attack everything you hold sacred. This is the moment where I need to know what you're thinking. Are you horrified by how completely the hypothetical person in this scenario has been changed by their circumstances? Are you thinking this could never happen to you? Drop horrified if this transformation seems impossible to you, or realistic if you think this kind of psychological adaptation is actually how human beings work when placed in extreme circumstances. Because what happens next is going to challenge every assumption about identity, morality, and the stability of human personality that you might have. The Spanish conquest of Tenochtitlan is one of the most brutal and tragic events in human history, and you experience it from the perspective of someone who's fighting to defend everything you've learned to believe in. When the Spanish begin destroying Aztec temples and melting down golden religious artifacts to create ingots for shipping back to Spain, you don't see cultural preservation efforts or the liberation of an oppressed people. You see sacrilege on a cosmic scale, the systematic destruction of the religious infrastructure that keeps the universe from collapsing into chaos. When Spanish priests begin converting Aztecs to Christianity, explaining that there's only one God who doesn't require human sacrifice, you don't hear good news about a more humane religion. You hear dangerous lies that will anger the traditional gods and bring catastrophic consequences to everyone. You fight alongside your fellow priests to defend the temple complex against Spanish attacks. You help organize the defense of religious sites. You participate in ceremonies designed to strengthen divine protection against the foreign invaders. And you work to maintain morale among the Aztec defenders by reminding them that they're fighting for the continued existence of the world itself. And when the Spanish finally break through the temple defenses and begin the systematic destruction of everything you've spent years building, you feel the same kind of devastation that anyone feels when their life's work is destroyed by forces beyond their control. You're not experiencing this as liberation from a morally corrupt system. You're experiencing it as the apocalypse. In the final battle for the Templo Mayor, you're wounded by Spanish steel, a deep cut across your chest that leaves you bleeding and semi-conscious among the rubble of the temple you helped maintain for half a decade. As you lie there, drifting in and out of consciousness, you hear Spanish soldiers speaking in a language that sounds almost familiar, like something you might have known in another life. One of them kneels beside you, a young conquistador, who's checking to see if you're still alive. He speaks to you in Spanish, asking if you can understand him, and for just a moment, the words almost make sense. You try to respond, and what comes out is a mixture of Nahuatl and something else. Syllables that sound like they might be from the language the Spanish soldier is speaking, but arranged in patterns that don't quite work. The soldier looks confused and calls for one of the Spanish priests who's accompanying the expedition. This priest kneels beside you and begins speaking in what he assumes is your native language, trying to offer you last rites according to Catholic tradition. But something about his accent, something about the rhythm of his speech, triggers a memory that's been buried for years under layers of Aztec cultural conditioning. You remember sitting in a room with artificial lighting, looking at a glowing screen, learning about something called the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. You remember reading about Hernan Cortes and Moctezuma, and the fall of Tenochtitlan as historical events that happened centuries ago to people who lived in a completely different world. You remember that you used to be one of those people. The memories come flooding back all at once. Your name, your life, your original world with its cars and computers and moral systems based on individual rights rather than cosmic balance. You remember that you used to think human sacrifice was an absolute evil, that you used to believe in the value of individual human life above all other considerations. You remember who you used to be before you became who you are now, and lying there in the ruins of the temple you helped defend, bleeding from wounds inflicted by people who might have been your cultural contemporaries, you have to confront the most terrifying question of your life. Which version of yourself is real? Okay, this is it. The big philosophical question that this entire scenario has been building toward. If you spend years becoming a completely different person, with different values, different beliefs, different emotional attachments, and different moral commitments, which version of you is the real you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is the real you the person you were originally, or the person you became through experience? Are we defined by our origins or by our adaptations? Because the answer to that question determines how this story ends. As you lie there bleeding, caught between two versions of yourself that seem equally real and equally foreign, the Spanish priest continues trying to administer last rites. He's speaking in Latin now, words that trigger another layer of half-remembered knowledge. You studied Latin in high school. You remember declining nouns and conjugating verbs and struggling through passages of Caesar's Gallic Wars. The memory is so vivid that, for a moment, you can almost smell the particular combination of floor wax and teenage anxiety that characterized your old classroom. But then you try to hold on to that memory, and it starts to slip away, replaced by the much more immediate reality of pain from your wounds and the acrid smell of smoke from the burning temple around you. The Spanish priest notices that you seem to be responding to Latin, so he switches to Spanish and then to broken Nahuatl, trying to find a language you can communicate in. When he speaks Spanish, you understand perhaps one word in 10. When he speaks Nahuatl, you understand everything perfectly. This is when you realize that your language centers have been completely rewired. You think in Nahuatl now. You dream in Nahuatl. Your emotional responses are tied to Nahuatl concepts that don't have equivalents in the languages you use to speak. You try to say something in English, your original native language, and what comes out is a broken mixture of English words, arranged according to Nahuatl grammar patterns. It's like trying to speak a language you half remember from childhood, except the childhood you're remembering might have been someone else's. The Spanish priest asks you in slow, careful Nahuatl if you want to convert to Christianity, if you want to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior and renounce the false gods you've been serving. And here's the thing. Part of you, the part that remembers being a modern person with modern values, knows that he's offering you a chance to align yourself with a moral system that doesn't involve cutting people's hearts out on stone altars. But another part of you, the part that spent 5 years learning to see the universe through Aztec eyes, knows that he's asking you to betray everything you've come to understand about the sacred, responsibilities that keep the world functioning. You're being asked to choose not just between two religions, but between two completely different versions of yourself. As you struggle with this decision, you become aware that there are other people around you, Aztec survivors, who are watching to see what you'll do. Some of them are fellow priests who trusted you, worked with you, became your friends over years of shared service to what you all believed was a sacred cause. If you convert to Christianity, you're not just changing your own religious affiliation, you're validating the Spanish conquest, legitimizing the destruction of everything your colleagues devoted their lives to protecting. If you refuse to convert, you're not just maintaining your theological consistency, you're choosing to die for beliefs that your original modern self would have considered morally abhorrent. And that's when you make the choice that defines who you really are. You look at the Spanish priest, and in slow, careful Nahuatl, you say, "I serve the gods who gave their blood to create the world. I will not abandon them for your God who demands that we abandon our sacred duties." The the Spanish priest crosses himself and begins praying for your soul. The Aztec survivors around you nod with respect and satisfaction. You've chosen to die as an Aztec priest rather than live as a Christian convert. As consciousness fades, your last thought isn't about the life you used to live or the person you used to be. Your last thought is about whether the sun will rise tomorrow without the proper sacrifices to ensure its journey across the sky. You die believing in the gods you learned to serve, fighting for the world you learned to understand, mourning for the cosmic order that you devoted your life to maintaining. You die as an Aztec priest who occasionally has strange dreams about a world that might have been nothing more than fantasy. So let me ask you, did you survive your day in Aztec times? On one level, obviously not. The person who woke up in Tenochtitlan in 1500 AD died in the ruins of the Templo Mayor in 1521. That story has a clear ending, and it's not a happy one from the perspective of individual survival. But on another level, something did survive. A consciousness that learned to navigate an alien world, that adapted to impossible circumstances, that became competent and successful within a completely different cultural framework. The question is whether that surviving consciousness was still you in any meaningful sense, or whether it was someone else entirely who just happened to be inhabiting your body. This is the real reason why you wouldn't last a day in Aztec times. Not because you'd be killed by violence or disease or cultural misunderstanding, but because the person who survived would no longer be recognizably you. Your identity, everything you think of as your essential self, is far more fragile and circumstantial than you probably want to believe. Your values, your beliefs, your emotional attachments, your moral commitments, even your language and the concepts you use to think with all of these things are shaped by the cultural environment you live in. Change that environment radically enough for long enough, and you don't just adapt to it, you become it. This brings us to some uncomfortable questions that extend far beyond the historical scenario we've been exploring. How much of who you are is really you, and how much is just a product of the time and place you happened to be born into? If you had been born into a completely different culture, one with different values, different beliefs, different assumptions about how the world works, would you still be you in any meaningful sense? And if the answer is no, then what does that say about the stability of identity, the nature of moral responsibility, and the claims we make about universal human values? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the person in this scenario remained essentially the same throughout their transformation, or did they become someone completely different? And more importantly, what does this story suggest about your own identity and values? Are they as stable and unchangeable as you think they are? Here's what I think this thought experiment really teaches us. Human beings are simultaneously more resilient and more fragile than we like to admit. We're resilient because we can adapt to almost any circumstances, survive almost any trauma, learn to function in almost any cultural environment. The person in our scenario didn't just survive in Aztec society, they thrived in it, became successful and respected, found meaning and purpose in ways they never could have imagined. But we're fragile because that adaptability comes at the cost of everything we think of as our essential selves. Our values, our beliefs, our identity. All of these things can be eroded and transformed by circumstances beyond our control. This isn't just a historical curiosity. This process of identity transformation happens in the modern world all the time, just usually more gradually and less dramatically. Think about how much you've changed since you were a teenager. Your values, your beliefs, your priorities, your understanding of what's important in life. How much of that is the same as it was 10 or 20 years ago? Think about people you know who've undergone major life changes, immigration to a new country, joining the military, going through religious conversion, surviving trauma, experiencing major success or failure. How much did those experiences change who they fundamentally are? Or think about more troubling examples. People who get radicalized by extremist ideologies. People who get caught up in cult movements. People who gradually adapt to corrupt institutional environments and lose their original moral compass. The process isn't different in kind from what happened to our hypothetical time traveler. It's just different in degree and speed. This is why studying history isn't just about learning facts about the past. It's about understanding the full range of human possibility, including possibilities that make us uncomfortable. The Aztecs weren't aliens or monsters. They were human beings like us, with the same cognitive capabilities, the same emotional needs, the same capacity for love and creativity and moral reasoning that we have. If they could build a society based on human sacrifice and genuinely believe it was not just acceptable but necessary, then human nature is far more malleable and circumstantial than most of us want to acknowledge. So here's my challenge for you. Instead of thinking about this story as a safely distant historical scenario, think about it as a mirror that reflects aspects of your own life and society. What beliefs do you hold that seem absolutely obvious and correct to you, but might seem bizarre or even evil to people from other cultures or other time periods? What institutions do you participate in that you've learned to see as normal and necessary, but that an outside observer might see as harmful or corrupt? What aspects of your identity do you think are essential and unchangeable, but might actually be products of circumstances that could shift under different conditions? Because here's the thing that should really keep you up at night. We're not living in some morally perfected world that's finally figured out the right way to organize human society. We're living in our own version of Tenochtitlan, with our own systems that future historians might look back on with the same horror that we feel when we read about Aztec human sacrifice. Think about the global economic system that allows millions of people to live in extreme poverty, while others have more wealth than they could spend in multiple lifetimes. Think about environmental destruction that we know is happening but continue because changing our lifestyle would be inconvenient. Think about factory farming that causes immense animal suffering but continues because we like cheap meat. Think about prison systems that are designed more for punishment than rehabilitation. Military-industrial complexes that profit from global conflict. Or healthcare systems that let people die from treatable diseases because they can't afford care. From the perspective of someone living in our society, these things might seem regrettable but inevitable, just part of how the world works, too complex to change, requiring trade-offs that reasonable people have to accept. From the perspective of a hypothetical future society, they might look like the systematic, institutional cruelty of a civilization that hadn't yet figured out how to organize itself according to basic moral principles. The Aztecs didn't see themselves as evil people who enjoyed causing suffering. They saw themselves as responsible citizens maintaining the systems that kept their world functioning. Sound familiar? I want you to really think about this. What aspects of modern society do you think future historians might look back on with the same bewilderment and horror that we feel when we read about Aztec human sacrifice? Drop your thoughts in the comments and be honest. What are we doing right now that we've learned to see as normal and necessary, but that might actually be causing immense unnecessary suffering? Because recognizing these parallels isn't about moral relativism or claiming that all societies are equally good or bad. It's about understanding that moral blindness is a constant human tendency, not something that only affected people in the past. Here's the most disturbing lesson from our Aztec thought experiment. Adaptation is morally neutral. The same psychological flexibility that allows humans to survive trauma, learn new skills, and function in diverse environments also allows us to normalize cruelty, rationalize injustice, and become complicit in systems that cause harm. The person in our scenario didn't become an Aztec priest because they were evil or weak-willed. They became an Aztec priest because they were psychologically normal, capable of learning, adapting, and finding meaning in whatever environment they found themselves in. This is why simply having good intentions or strong moral principles isn't enough to guarantee ethical behavior. If you put good people in bad systems for long enough, the systems tend to win. The Stanford prison experiment demonstrated this on a small scale. The Holocaust demonstrated it on a massive scale. Corporate corruption, political scandals, military atrocities, institutional cover-ups. These things happen not because they're carried out by unusually evil people, but because they're carried out by normal people who gradually adapted to abnormal circumstances. Which brings us to the most important question. If adaptation is inevitable, and if moral blindness is a constant human tendency, then what responsibility do we have to actively resist both? How do you maintain your moral compass in a world that's constantly trying to reshape it? How do you recognize when you're being gradually corrupted by systems you've learned to see as normal? How do you distinguish between healthy adaptation and unhealthy compromise? These aren't just philosophical questions. These are practical questions that affect how you live your daily life. Every time you choose convenience over principle, every time you rationalize participating in something you know is harmful because everyone else is doing it, every time you tell yourself that you can't make a difference, so there's no point in trying, you're taking small steps down the same path that led our hypothetical time traveler from confused, modern person to competent Aztec priest. So here's my challenge. Identify one aspect of your life where you've gradually adapted to something that contradicts your original values. Maybe it's a job that requires you to do things you don't believe in. Maybe it's relationships that drain your energy but that you've learned to tolerate. Maybe it's consumption habits that you know are harmful but that have become automatic. Whatever it is, recognize that adaptation isn't always positive, and that maintaining your integrity requires active resistance to the slow erosion of your principles. Drop "challenge accepted" in the comments if you're willing to honestly examine these patterns in your own life. Because the alternative is to wake up one day and realize that you've become someone you don't recognize, serving systems you never consciously chose to support. But here's the thing about this entire thought experiment. It's not really about the Aztecs, and it's not really about time travel. It's about you, right now, in the 21st century, with all the choices and opportunities and responsibilities that come with living in this particular time and place. Unlike our hypothetical time traveler, you're not trapped in a foreign culture with no way home. You have access to diverse perspectives, historical knowledge, scientific understanding, and moral frameworks that can help you recognize and resist the kind of gradual corruption that transformed a modern person into an Aztec priest. You have the ability to study history and learn from the mistakes of past societies. You can read about different cultures and understand how arbitrary and circumstantial many of our assumptions about normal behavior really are. You can use that knowledge to maintain some critical distance from your own society's blind spots. You have access to philosophical and ethical traditions that emphasize universal human values rather than just local customs. You can choose to ground your moral principles in reasoning rather than just tradition, which makes them more resistant to erosion by changing circumstances. Most importantly, You have the ability to choose communities and environments that support the kind of person you want to be, rather than just accepting whatever circumstances you happen to find yourself in. This doesn't mean you should become a moral purist who refuses to participate in any imperfect system. That kind of absolute moral purity is usually just another form of self-deception, and it often leads to paralysis rather than positive action. What it means is that you should approach adaptation consciously rather than unconsciously. When you find yourself changing your values or behavior to fit new circumstances, ask yourself, is this change making me more capable of doing good in the world, or is it just making me more comfortable with doing harm? When you find yourself rationalizing participation in systems that cause suffering, ask yourself, am I actually powerless to resist, or am I just choosing convenience over principle? When you find yourself accepting explanations for why harmful things are necessary and inevitable, ask yourself, who benefits from me believing these explanations, and what would happen if I refuse to accept them? The person in our Aztec scenario didn't have access to alternative perspectives or support communities that could have helped them maintain their original moral framework. They were completely isolated in a world that gave them only two choices: adapt or die. You have more options. You can choose to surround yourself with people who share your values and will challenge you when you start to compromise them. You can choose to regularly expose yourself to perspectives that challenge your assumptions and keep you intellectually honest. You can choose to support institutions and systems that align with your principles, even when it's inconvenient. Most importantly, you can choose to take responsibility for the kind of world you're creating through your daily choices, rather than just adapting to whatever world you happen to find yourself in. Drop a comment about one thing you're going to do differently as a result of thinking through this scenario. It doesn't have to be huge. Small changes in how you approach daily decisions can have profound long-term effects on who you become. Because that's the real lesson here. You're not a passive victim of circumstance who has no choice but to adapt to whatever environment you find yourself in. You're an active agent who can shape both yourself and your environment through conscious, deliberate choices. The question is, what are you going to choose? So here we are, at the end of our journey through one of history's most complex and morally challenging civilizations. We've spent the last couple of hours exploring what it might be like to not just visit Aztec times, but to actually survive and adapt to them in ways that would fundamentally change who you are. And if you've made it this far, if you've really engaged with the psychological and moral complexities we've been exploring, then you've already done something that most people never do. You've honestly confronted the instability of human identity and the fragility of moral principles under extreme pressure. I know this wasn't the light historical entertainment that the title might have suggested. We didn't just talk about interesting Aztec customs or amusing cultural misunderstandings. We went deep into questions about adaptation, identity, moral compromise, and the ways that circumstances can transform us in ways we never expected. Because that's what real history does. It challenges our assumptions about human nature, moral progress, and the inevitability of our own values and institutions. As you sit there in your comfortable chair, in your climate-controlled room, with access to more information and opportunities than any Aztec could have imagined, you're still facing the same fundamental choice that our hypothetical time traveler faced. You can adapt unconsciously to whatever circumstances you find yourself in, or you can adapt consciously with awareness of the moral implications of your choices. The difference is that you have resources and options that weren't available to someone trapped in 16th century Tenochtitlan. You can use those resources to become more than just a product of your circumstances. So let me know in the comments. What's one insight from this exploration that you're going to carry with you? What's one question it raised that you want to keep thinking about? What's one way it changed how you think about yourself, your society, or your responsibilities as a human being living in this particular time and place? And if you enjoyed this kind of deep historical analysis that connects past and present in uncomfortable but important ways, let me know what other civilizations or historical scenarios you'd like to explore, because history is full of examples that can challenge our assumptions and help us understand ourselves better, if we're willing to engage with them honestly. Thanks for taking this journey with me. Thanks for being willing to engage with difficult questions and uncomfortable possibilities. Thanks for being the kind of person who's interested in understanding human nature in all its complexity, rather than just consuming simple stories that confirm what you already believe. The world needs more people who are willing to think deeply about these kinds of questions. The world needs more people who understand that moral progress isn't automatic or inevitable, but requires constant vigilance and conscious choice. The world needs more people who recognize that we're all just a few circumstances away from becoming someone we don't recognize, and who use that recognition to make better choices while we still can. So the next time you're tempted to think that you would have been one of the good guys in any historical period, the next time you're confident that you would never compromise your principles under pressure, the next time you assume that moral progress is just a matter of time and education, remember our Aztec priest. Remember that they started as someone just like you, with similar values and similar confidence in their own moral stability. And remember that the difference between you and them might not be as large as you'd like to think. But also remember that recognizing that difference is the first step toward making sure you don't repeat their mistakes. Hit that like button if this kind of deep historical exploration is something you want to see more of. Subscribe if you want to join more journeys into the complex, uncomfortable, and fascinating world of human history and psychology. And I'll see you in the next one.